From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
Democracy is in the ballot for all of us. We, the people, must decide whether the rule of law will prevail, whether we will allow the dark forces to thirst for power put ahead of the principles that we've long guided us.
Well, it's now just 2 days until the critical midterm elections. Both Republicans and Democrats spending the final week leading up to Election Day stumping for candidates.
You've got election deniers serving as your governor, as your senator, as your secretary of state, as your attorney general, then democracy as we know it may not survive.
I'm here because Stacey Abrams can never be governor of the great state of Georgia. We've got to re-elect Brian Kemp.
Boy, big names from both parties hitting the campaign trail. President Biden even delivered a message last week saying democracy is on the ballot, as you heard. In the final push, the midterm push, Democrats are on the defensive. Many key races in battleground states are too close to call, and that means control of Congress is still up for grabs. Meanwhile, Utah is emerging as a wild card in the battle for the Senate. A new Emerson College survey shows Senator Mike Lee currently has a 10-point lead over his independent challenger, Evan McMullin. The poll found 49% of likely voters here in the state of Utah say they will vote for Senator Lee in this week's election, while 39% offered their support for Evan McMullin. I'm very pleased that joining me this morning here on the program will be the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah. We're going to talk about the latest polling numbers and some of the interesting ads that we have been seeing. Jason, thank you so much. I always appreciate your willingness to join us on Sunday Edition.
Thank you, Doug. So glad to be with you.
Let's talk about this latest poll, the Emerson poll. 10%. And, you know, you and I have talked about a lot of polls that are within margin of error and so on. Are you at all surprised by this 10-point spread now?
So I am. You know, we've been getting so many different polls, and, you know, we have the internal candidate polling, and it shows between 1 or Mike Lee says 18, something like that. But this is one of the first real respected outside pollsters that have looked at this race and come up with a 10-point lead. That's pretty considerable given we only have a couple of days before election, and definitely big considering that Mike Lee had a much closer spread over just the past few days ago.
When I first read about this particular poll and some of the thinking that went into why we're seeing this switch, almost inevitably, sometimes there was a little tap dancing around it, but inevitably it came back to, I'm sorry, but nasty ads really work. Do you agree with that? Or this reason for the spread, is it because the nasty ads are actually working?
Yeah, I have a couple ideas about why that's happening, but I will tell you this, Doug. We talked to people about whether or not these ads work, and we even did our own polling on this to ask Utahns if it did have an impact on them. And this is what's interesting. It gets to why these tactics continue. 66% of Utahns said that negative campaigning has zero impact on them, which I'll tell you, in my experience, is just not true. The reality is it continues to happen because it does work. And bad stuff is so much easier to believe. The bad stuff is so much easier to go out and to promote through the channels. It's a sad commentary, but my experience is that negative campaigning does have an impact.
I've found the same thing to be true. I'll be talking with people, if you just ask them straight up, will a negative ad either turn you on or off toward a candidate or a cause? And they will say, if anything, it turns me off, and it doesn't make any difference. But it truly does. And the way these ads are presented now, you know, the person that they want you to vote for is in full color, looking all perky and happy. The other guy looks like maybe he might be bordering on being a vampire. It is startling to me that we still buy into this, and it really does make a difference.
So it does. You know, when you talk to your neighbors or you talk to people, I was doing a presentation earlier this morning and asked the very same question if it has an impact. And this is what people tend to say is, it doesn't impact me, but I can see how it impacts others.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
Let's talk about how the candidates themselves, we've had discussions before about this privately and on the air, the outside money that flows in, the dollar amounts that I am hearing that have flown into the state of Utah and have been in flyers and mailers and on the air, radio, television, everything else. It is just staggering. I've never seen anything like this in Utah. I've certainly seen it around the country, but not here in Utah.
You do see it in some of those other places, but I will tell you, Doug, this is going to be the most expensive race we have ever seen in the state of Utah. You look at just the candidates themselves, they have spent about $15.5 million on these campaigns. And you add to that another $15.8 million from outside groups going into this race. You cannot watch TV right now without seeing a commercial or something in your mailbox. Outside interests are seriously interested in this race, and they are coming after the state of Utah.
The messages and the advertisements that have come to us directly from the candidates, it has the disclaimer on it, it has the candidate's voice on it, whatever, that makes it from their campaign and that they approve this message. How do you think they have conducted themselves on both sides, Senator Lee and Evan McMullin?
Well, it's the hard thing about these outside interests really is people say we don't like them very much. And the candidates, they look at them and they say, well, I can't really control what they say or what they do. And they don't really try to either. In fact, oftentimes these campaigns, the candidates will say, yeah, I don't love how unsavory that is, but I'm not going to say anything about that either. Just let it kind of go.
Yeah.
And when I look at this race, Doug, I think your question is so insightful because I wonder how nasty these races would be, or this Senate race would be, if we did not have outside money. If it was just the candidates themselves and no one else, I have to hope that it would be a little nicer.
Right. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. And even if this spread ends up being the results, this will still be the closest Senate election we've had in memory.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this is a big experiment right here. And we see a traditional Republican versus a Democrat. But if Evan McMullin can pull this off, or he comes close, there's a lot of messaging in that all by itself, because the closest race will be a third party.
Yeah. Thank you again so much. And next, we're going to be talking with Utah's Lieutenant Governor about the election deadlines, security. We'll be right back with Deidre Henderson. Welcome back. Ballots have been mailed and many have been cast already in Utah's midterm election. If you haven't cast your vote yet, you can still get your ballot in the mail tomorrow. And here to talk more about the election deadlines and security regarding our elections is Utah's Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson. Lieutenant Governor, thank you first and foremost for joining us here on Sunday Edition. And let's talk about getting the ballots in and making sure that they're counted and that you're doing things right.
Well, thanks, Doug. It's great to be here. And I think the thing that you said in your introduction there is really important for voters to know. And that is, if they're going to return their ballots by mail in the U.S. Postal Service, they have to be postmarked by tomorrow. They have to be postmarked by November 7th.
And if somebody happens to space that, or it's a little late in the day and they're getting concerned and they really want their vote to count this year, then what are the options? What can they do then?
Well, if it's any time during postal hours on the 7th, they can go in, and I recommend they get a hand cancellation,
right,
hand stamp, so that they know it's been postmarked the 7th. But they can also go to a secure ballot drop box at any time through election night, through 8 p.m. on election night when the polls are closed, and they can just slip their ballot into that secure drop box, which this year there was a law passed that requires video surveillance 24/7 of those ballot drop boxes, so they can put them in there knowing that they're secure, or take it into an in-person polling location, drop it off there, or even vote in person on election day if they so choose.
Good old school.
Absolutely. Some people really enjoy that, and that's great. That's fine. We want people to vote no matter how they vote. We want them to do it in the way that they feel the most comfortable.
I always like getting the little sticker that we got when we voted in person, but it's on the ballot now.
Right. My county clerk includes the sticker with our mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite have that same effect, I guess, to get it in the envelope, but people want to vote in person, they certainly can. I recommend, if they know who they want to vote for, they just go ahead and get it done early. The more people vote early, the bigger the returns are going to be on when the polls close on election night.
Have you heard any rumblings about how we are doing? I know Dee and I voted quite early, and other members of our family, because we were pretty solid on who we were going to go with.
Yeah, it's actually pretty low this year. You know, it's a midterm election. We're not going to expect the turnout to be as big as it would be during a presidential year. During 2020, it was a huge turnout, and it was all vote by mail pretty much in the state because of the pandemic. We didn't have the same type of in-person polling locations as we have now. But we have definitely seen not a whole lot of turnout so far. We're hoping that those numbers go up and the people get their ballots turned in.
We were chatting about this prior to going on the air. I've seen some rather interesting things that are local. These aren't national, but local campaigns that are saying, you know, we've got to do this, and we've got to stop the election fraud. Do we have election fraud in the state of Utah?
Well, I totally agree that we have to stop election fraud, and we do. We work all day, every day, my staff, county clerks across the state to make sure there's no fraud. We have very secure elections in our state. And one of the reasons why we've been able to have such wonderful mail-in experiences, such secure elections, is because we've been doing it for about 10 years now.
Right.
And we implemented it slowly. We let counties opt in to by mail voting over time as they wanted to. By 2020, the legislature did pass a law requiring everyone to vote by mail primarily, but also allowing for in-person polling locations on election day and early voting as well. But we have multiple checks and balances through every part of the process. I just went to recently to a polling location and a ballot processing center in Davis County, and they have so many people there who are going through all of the ballots, checking, double checking, triple checking. It's all done in a public setting. People can go in and watch. Everything your election workers do is done in public,
right.
And people can have that surety and knowledge that there's no way that any election officials are doing anything funky.
You know, I've talked with some people, and they'll say, well, even if it is accurate, and even if there isn't, you know, basic monkey business going on regarding the ballots, I just feel that there should be a paper trail. And I always just go, wow. We have a paper trail.
Absolutely. We absolutely have a paper trail, and one that is audited. You know, we've heard a lot of calls for auditing of our elections, and every single election, every race in our election is audited in the state of Utah. So that happens. We have put robust processes in place. But the thing that I love about our state is that we're always looking for ways we can do things better. We're never of the mindset that, well, it's as good as it's going to get.
Right.
We're finished here. We've got nothing else to do. We're always looking for ways to make our elections more secure and make access to the ballot better for people. You can have both. You can have good access to the ballot for eligible voters and have robust election security so that everyone has that assurance that that their vote's going to count and it's going to count accurately.
I've always been impressed because little glitches will come up, you know, and nobody's being Pollyanna-ish here, and there's never a problem. But when I've seen a problem emerge, first of all, it's relatively minor. Sometimes it's just a problem of convenience, a line that was too long because turnout was more than had been anticipated. But the way it's jumped on and the problem is solved has always impressed me.
We work round the clock to make sure that our elections are run well. And yes, problems do arise. We had problems with ballots getting mailed out to Iron and Carbon counties on time. And
Right.
That wasn't the county's fault at all. That was a problem that occurred with the printer and the people who shipped the ballots and made a mistake. But you know what? The county clerk worked to get the word out to the voters and extend in-person polling locations and do everything that he possibly could to make sure everybody had an opportunity to vote.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you. It's an honor to have you on the show, and we'll look forward to after the election. Perhaps we'll be chatting again about how things went.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. And we will be right back with more of Sunday Edition. Leading up to these midterm elections, we've been watching the Dignity Index very closely. Messages from the candidates scored from 1 to 8, 1 being a high level of contempt 8 being a high level of dignity. And this morning on the show with me is Tammy Pfeiffer and Jesse Graham. They have joined us before, and I so appreciate you joining us to talk about the Dignity Index. And today we're going to look at the Senate races and the messages from the candidates during the press interviews. So let's get to the messages. You'll see them on your screen, but I'll try to give you the feel of it and read the messages from the candidates. They have been courting the endorsement of Mitt Romney in this race. This is what Evan McMullin said about Romney during an interview with NBC back on October 16th. Certainly we have in Senator Romney someone who has gotten a lot done for our state and our country, working across party lines to get things done. With Senator Lee, we get none of that. He sits on his hands until it's time to vote no, and then he goes and complains about our country on cable news, and I'm just not going to do that. Then Senator Mike Lee, also talking about Senator Romney during an interview with Fox News on October 12th. His message: I'm asking him here again tonight, right now, Mitt, if you would like to protect the Republican majority, give us any chance of seizing the Republican majority, once again, getting it away from the Democrats who are facilitating this massive spending spree, massive inflationary binge. Please get on board, help me win re-election. Let's get the reaction to that, and maybe first of all we can get the score from you, Jesse.
Sure, and again we have teams of coders working on these. We have liberals and conservatives working together to score these. Both of those passages got a 4 on the Dignity Index, and so that's on the contempt end. It's sort of the beginning of contempt. My opponent is incompetent. They're not doing a good job. They're doing this, massive spending, sitting on their hands, things like that. So they're not necessarily saying he's a bad person, but they're saying, I'm better than him.
Maybe we can get your quick reaction to this. And boy, what would it take to get a 1 or a 2?
Well, we talk about the defining feature of a 4 is attacking someone for their beliefs or their commitment. And to move that back on the dignity side is you can cite things where you disagree with that candidate, but give specific examples of what those disagreements are. It's harder to do, and it takes more time for you to attack someone when you have to provide proof of, here's where I disagreed with your vote. That's what it would take to get it up onto the dignity side.
We're going to share a few more exchanges, and let's go to this one, another message from McMullin. This statement made during an interview with the Salt Lake Chamber on October 13th. I really think the number one thing is, going back to this, the way we find common ground to solve problems. I mean, we're all familiar as Utahns with many of these examples where you have two different interests who have seemingly nothing in common and lots in difference, and they find common ground to solve problems. And we've led on so many issues in that way, and I think we just need that approach, more of that approach in Washington. Now from Senator Lee, a message he told the Michael Knowles Show podcast a few days ago. When we get back, I really do think we'll be on a short leash from the American people, with good reason. We will be on a short leash in the sense that people will expect us to put an end to all of the nonsense that Joe Biden is perpetrating on the American people. Let's get your reaction to that. First, the score.
Yeah, so that first passage got a score of 6, and that's on the dignity end. That's where you're looking for common ground. You want to talk about areas where you agree with the other side. You're not necessarily open to changing your mind. That would be more of a 7, but 6 is a level of openness. Yeah.
And Tammy, your take on that?
So the features of a 6 are when we reach out to the other side, and we acknowledge the need to reach out to the other side, which is what Evan McMullin did in his remarks.
Now, what about Senator Lee and his comments?
Yeah, that one was scored a 4, and again, that's sort of the beginning of contempt for Joe Biden, for the other side.
And Tammy?
Yeah, and when he says things like all of the nonsense that Joe Biden is perpetrating on the American people, you're insinuating that the president is reckless or irresponsible in what he's doing, which is a level.
Do words like perpetrating matter? Because we always hear, well, that's the perp. This is the person that perpetrated the crime. Does just the use of that word?
The words matter, and the way you use the words maybe as a pejorative instead of just describing a situation definitely matter.
Let's go to some more comments. One more message from each of the candidates, and this one from Evan McMullin's interview with the Salt Lake Chamber. Right now, we have a senator, my opponent, who has embraced the politics of division and extremism, who has, you know, in 12 years of service, only introduced 6 bills that have become law. 2 of them named post offices, 1 of them named a veterans center, and the other 3 were insignificant as well. We need someone who is going to go to Washington to represent our interests and to actually do the work. The job is not only to vote no on every bill and go complain about it on Fox News. The job is to actually work with Republicans and Democrats, work with one's colleagues in the Senate to solve problems. Then this one from Senator Lee during an interview on KUTV's Take 2 podcast. I have long been a proponent of updating and modernizing our immigration legal system and also dealing with those who are currently here in an unlawful status in the United States. There is no group of people in that latter category more sympathetic to those who were brought here by no choice of their own, but still in an undocumented status. I don't personally know anyone in either party and either House of Congress who believes the answer is mass deportation of all those who are here unlawfully, who were brought here as children or as infants. I do think something has to be done about it in order to have the consensus necessary to address it as we have to secure our border. What about that one on the grading for both of the candidates?
Yeah, so that McMullin quote was given a 4. Again, he's not saying that Lee is necessarily a bad person or evil or anything like that. He's just saying that he's incompetent. He's not doing a good job. He's not passing bills. He's just, complaining on Fox News. That second passage from Mike Lee got a 6, so that was on the dignity end. Again, because he's talking about common ground. He's talking about areas where both sides agree about the immigration problem.
Tammy, your thoughts on this?
Well, when you hear these statements on the contempt side, what the speaker is clearly doing is trying to encourage more contempt for their opponent. So it's not just, here's the facts, but I want you to also hold contempt for my opponent. And when you get to the 6 score on Mike Lee, he's able to speak on a really contentious subject, but talk about common values that both sides have, and that gets you onto the dignity side of the scale.
I so appreciate you both joining us. This has been a very interesting exercise, I think, for anyone who has been concerned about the tone and kind of where we're going with these campaigns. And I really appreciate your insights. I appreciate what the Dignity Index is trying to do, and we'll have more conversations. Thank you to both of you, Jesse and Tammy. Thank you for joining us. And thank all of you for being out there today watching this episode of Sunday Edition. We hope you'll join us again next week. We'll be looking back at the elections next week. Music and the spoken word. That's coming up next.